We go. Good morning, everyone. To start, Crawford Australia acknowledges the traditional owners of country and recognises their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. Melbourne, where we are today, is located on the traditional lands of the Kulin Nation. The Wurundjeri people are the traditional owners. We pay our respects to elders past and present. Welcome to our talk today on lithium-ion batteries. My name is Jon Stagg. I'm a Senior Liability Adjuster with the Crawford Liability team here in Melbourne. I'm joined today by Mark Cousins, who's a partner at Burgoynes. Mark is a chartered electrical engineer and a certified fire investigator. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're here today to talk about lithium-ion batteries. They're fast becoming the lifeblood of modern technology, and we've put, to start with, at estimate from the ACCC that every household by 2026 will have around 33 devices, which got me thinking how many are in my house. You might think how many are on your person. I think at the moment I'm sitting with 3 and I've got another one with headphones in the bag over there. But food for thought. You can go through and count later tonight how many are in your house after this presentation may have frightened you a little bit, but that's not our intention. What we'll do today is I'll talk through some of the observations Crawford has made from dealing with these claims as they become more and more prevalent, and then I'll hand over to Mark, who will talk through more of the technical information and detail around the inner workings of these batteries and why they're causing, or what has to happen for them to give rise to a fire or another issue. Next slide. I want to click. So in preparation for this presentation, I had a chat with the different parts of the Crawford business, including our property teams, our GTS, Global Technical Services teams, and the lawyers in our law firm, HBA Legal, as well as our third-party administrators and our building engineers and CRD. Everyone seems to have a story about these batteries being at the centre of their claims. So what we've done is taken some key examples from around the business so that we can talk about the sort of risks we're seeing, sort of claims we're seeing, and then Mark will go into why those claims are happening. I'll be very careful not to put myself out there as a battery expert. Really, we're there to ask the right questions and connect clients with experts like Mark so they can dive into cause and origin of these fires. Next slide, please. So on this screen, we have what I found were the common threads when speaking to people around the business of what devices or areas they're finding batteries are causing fires or involved in fires throughout their claims. So all the common ones there, except for in red, was the one that was most surprising when I was talking to someone in our GTS team. So we've got smart devices, your phones, your watches, your ordinary watches with a lithium cell in the back. Your smart tools, your battery-powered handheld tools, and the various home appliances like your hoovers. We also have boats and cars and model planes. I think one of our lawyers was telling me about a model plane that burst into flames whilst it was up in the air, which might have been a cool reenactment, but I'm sure not what the modeler wanted to see. For those of you in the room, anyone can tell me what's in the red circle? Yeah, so remember that for the next one. That surprised me, but when you think about it, yeah, it's something that is powered and needs to be portable and have a long battery life. Oh, sorry, next slide. I'm trying to click my own button for it. Someone else is running it. So these fire claims, generally what we are seeing is fires. We're seeing a little bit of knock-on effects in terms of pollution, and there'll be some injury claims that arise from it. We've stayed away today from too many of the injury examples, but you'll see in some of the videos Mark will show you there's quite a potential for injury to occur. Generally, in Crawford's, we've found that there are 3 key causes, if you like, that are giving rise to fires involving these batteries. The first one there, we've got overcharged batteries. So on the upper left of your screen, that used to be a golf cart. We believe it was on charge at the time it caught fire, and there's no other causes in the vicinity that we could draw from. We'll talk about how easy it is to determine cause with Mark, but as you can see, there's not a lot left, and we'd say that's beyond economical repair. On the right is I think it's a power inverter one of our domestic guys had, but it was for a small a small business that has a charging bank in their garage to recharge batteries for power tools, and that's been on charge, whatever he's done in terms of the systems and steps he was taking to charge, or if this was a bespoke system. It's not a happy one, and so that's caused a small fire in the home. Luckily, that one seems to have not been too bad. Further down in the middle of your screen, so on the left, there's a yacht that's on fire. This is one of the claims I had in New Zealand not too long ago. And what we think happened here, unfortunately, the evidence sank to the bottom of the Hauraki Gulf. But in working backwards and looking at how the batteries had been used and implemented, there was talk around, are these, it's probably a bit of a crossover from batteries left in hot places as well, that they're in a closed compartment, strapped down with metal straps. And the thought was it may have been done too tightly, caused damage to the batteries, prevented them from being able to do their thing whilst they heat up as they operate. And Mark will talk through what goes on there, and they've been restricted and set fire to the boat. This was an interesting claim. Fortunately, the couple who were on board at the time while it was anchored in Woolshed Bay managed to get off and swim to the nearest island. But we also had a leak of diesel and oil from the boat as it was going down, and that resulted in a plume of pollution throughout the Gulf that was about, I think it was 1 kilometre long and 300 metres wide, which prompted a sort of a government agency reaction, setting up an emergency response base in Thames and managing the pollution event from there whilst it burned off. On the right, we have a fairly common scenario. I know some of our guys who are in the room today have had fires with electric scooters. This one's taken from a recent story in the Australian media where, well, yeah, it's a case where these scooters are being damaged or they're being abused in use. And part of the problem we have with the scooters is they're generally being used by commuters who are taking them into apartment buildings up high. And I know there was a problem when these were first coming out, that the likes of New York have very tall buildings and you can't get a hose up there easily. And with these claims, they burn hot, they burn for a long time, and they're very difficult to extinguish. Couple in that this thing's 30 stories up. It's a bit of a recipe for quite a nasty problem, quite a big claim. And last but not least, I've not got actual claim photos, and you'll know why. So this is our pacemaker. Unfortunately, the person who owned the pacemaker had passed away and they were being cremated, and somebody neglected to remove the pacemaker before that process. And not to be too graphic, but this resulted in the crematorium needing to be rebuilt, having had an explosion inside the chamber, which I thought not something you think about, but yeah, definitely a space for the claim to happen. Generally, that's not a common scenario that we're seeing. Often we are getting claims where a phone or something like that's left in a hot place, or an appliance is left. I think we had someone the other day who might have left a device on an electric mattress on a bed, and that heated it up enough to cause a problem. But yeah, you'll see, I know I've been at a footy match and felt your phone heating up in your pocket because you're sitting in the sun, and that always makes me, knowing these claims occur, I tend to put it behind me so it doesn't get too hot. Next slide. So the key claim issues are really observations. We've got, that's another golf cart on the right there, which we didn't look to repair that one at all. We see, yeah, long burn time. They're hard to extinguish, and we've got that flow on damage, which we've talked about in the last few slides, and Mark will explain why these factors are present in these sorts of claims. The last one there, preservation of evidence. So for the adjusters, like I said, we're not experts in batteries, but the adjusters are the experts in asking the right questions and then connecting clients with the right experts to go and find out what the cause of these fires are. Unfortunately, we're seeing a pattern where insureds or third parties are perhaps inadvertently tampering with the scene before we can get someone like Mark over there to have a look at what the cause of the fire was. So case in point, we had a claim in New South Wales where they had some batteries on charge. By the time our adjuster got there, the claimant had changed how they had configured so that we couldn't be certain what chargers were being used. Part of the problem can be if you're using the wrong chargers on these devices, they'll cause an issue. And the guys had changed the setup they had when the fire occurred, moved some things, and that sort of disrupts the scene, so it makes it harder to have a look. With the case of these golf buggies, we can only say we're fairly sure that it's to do with the batteries. Unfortunately, the insured was instructed by another party 3 days after the fire to remove all of these from their warehouse. They then took them to a scrap dealer who crushed them on arrival and then shredded them a few hours later, which makes it very hard for someone like Mark to do their job and find out what happened. And it becomes a process of ruling out what's going on. So next slide. And why these fires occurred. I'll hand over to Mark at this point, and he can take us through his issues. If there's anyone online, we've got a few videos in the next part. If you could just put in a message or a question, and the guys who are running the slides can see if there's an issue with seeing them, but I think we should be okay. So over to Mark.
Next slide, please. And the next one. So just a little bit about Burgoynes for those of you who haven't come across us before. We're an international partnership of scientists and engineers, provide advice on fires, explosions and other engineering incidents to yourselves, the legal industry and the like. Next slide, please. We currently have 8 offices in the UK, an office in Singapore, Hong Kong, Dubai, Melbourne, and most recently, as of August this year, Perth. Next slide, please. I'm currently based in Melbourne, and Jason, one of our associates, is in Perth. We cover various different types of incident, fire explosion being probably the main one, but electrical engineering and mechanical engineering and personal injury we can offer from Australia at the moment, with support on the other 4 in that list from other parts of the world. Next slide, please. Currently, coming on to lithium batteries, we have 2 specialists in the UK. One is a consultant, Professor Paul Christensen. He's a head of department at Newcastle University, and he's an electrochemist. And we also have an associate, Malcolm Wise, who's come through from his courses. Next, please. Next slide, please. Sorry. So lithium-ion batteries. Very basically, they're just a way of storing energy. We see them in everything from mobile phones all the way through to ships these days. Basically, sorry, I'm just catching up on mine. The risks associated with lithium batteries are varied. So, and the more batteries you have, the more. Yeah, I've gone past it. But basically, the size of the batteries vary enormously, and the risk associated with a failure of one of them that is increases the risk as the risk increases as the number of batteries increase. Next slide, please. Lithium-ion cells come in sort of 3 basic forms. I say cells because a battery is only a battery if there's 2 or more cells. It's one of those things. The smallest and sort of component are those 3 there. So you've got the cylindrical cells on the left, which most people are familiar with, and the 18650 cells that they call, which is slightly bigger than a AA. The dry cell that we're all more familiar with, and then you have pouch cells and prismatic cells that are in devices such as phones and laptops and whatever as well. Now, next slide, please. So basically, you end up with a cell. Several cells make a battery or a module, and several modules make a battery pack or a unit. Next. So why do we use them? Basically, energy density and power density is the point. We've all got used to using mobile phones for with significant amount of power demands for all day without having to charge them. Electric cars are obviously coming along, and other items, and everything's going greener. They've also got advantages with lifespan and cost overall because of the amount being made. But probably what the most key point for this talk is the safety of them. Next slide, please. You probably can all remember some of the recalls listed there, probably the Boeing Dreamliner and Samsung recall on the note is probably one of the most known. More recently, GM and Hyundai have had recalls on their electric vehicles, as have VW, although that was apparently down to a soldering defect on the rather than the cell itself, which is an interesting point. Next slide, please. So a lithium-ion cell consists of two electrodes, an anode, which is typically graphite, and a cathode, and the material of which varies. There's various different types, nickel manganese cobalt oxide, nickel manganese NMC, often referred to, lithium iron phosphate, and etc. The anode and cathode are separated by a thin polymer or plastic separator that's soaked in electrolyte. The electrolyte is a mixture of organic compounds, and lithium salt, which dissolves to produce free lithium and hexafluoride ions, hence the name lithium-ion. The issue is the electrolyte is flammable. The separator prevents a short internal circuit between the two plates effectively, or the anode and the cathode. And during discharge, lithium ions move from the anode to the cathode, which is usually mixed metal oxide, and the electrons move outside of the battery through the load, i.e. the current flow, which is what we're trying to use them for. During charging, the ion and electron flow is reversed, so you're effectively recharging the battery, hence it's what they class as a secondary battery. That's all great, but lithium-ion batteries are thermodynamically unstable. Basically, the lithiated graphite on charging is very high energy and immediately reacts with the organic solvent to producing hydrogen and various other flammable gases and heat. Heat, as with most things, tends to speed up the process, so you generate more gases and more heat. If this continues, thermal runaway occurs, and often with a fire or explosion being the result. To prevent this reaction between the two plates, there is a protective layer called the solid electrolyte interface, which forms around the graphite particles. It's permeable to lithium ions, but prevents the solvent from reaching and touching the anode, so prevents the reaction occurring within the battery. The issue is if the thermal runaway can occur if that layer is damaged. Basically, when they're manufactured, they're manufactured at a low state of charge, deliberately at a low state of charge, trying to make sure that that layer forms properly and becomes very fairly strong. Next slide, please. So if a lithium-ion cell is abused or has a manufacturing defect, or the protective SEA protective layer internally around the graphite becomes damaged, an exothermic process can begin. If the heat produced cannot be dissipated faster than the amount being produced, temperature increases and you're into a runaway scenario, which the graph shows. As some of the protective measures that are put into the cells to try and prevent issues when this happens, Cylindrical and prismatic cells, for instance, have vents through and blast caps to allow that the pressure that's created to vent and vent safely. But the vented gases include hydrogen, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and other small chain gases, including hydrofluoric and hydrochloric acid, and hydrogen cyanide. So not a very nice mixture, and a fairly flammable mixture. The gases also take with them droplets of organic solvent, creating smoke or steam-like vapor. Immediate ignition produces long flare-like flames due to large volumes, and there's a few videos later which I'm sure everybody will be interested in. And one of the issues with it is if they are subject to being overheated, delayed ignition can occur. So it can occur sometime after the damage or the abuse has occurred. Next slide, please. This video shows a battery pack which was at a 50% state of charge, so it was only sort of half charged, if you like, and it's not smoke that's coming from it. It's actually vapors, more like steam-like vapors, which are flammable. A typical 1.7 kilowatt battery module will typically produce around 500 to 600 litres, 6,000 litres per kilowatt hour of flammable gas. So you end up with a fair amount of flammable gas being produced from quite a small battery. The extent of heat generated during the thermal runaway depends on several factors, chiefly the level of battery charge state. So at lower charges, they tend to produce gas, whereas when fully charged, you tend to end up with short circuits internally and sparking and ignition quite quickly. So they do ignite, self-ignite, if you like, but that's more prevalent at highest charge states. Next slide, please. Sorry. Cause of the thermal runaway: internal short circuit, basically where the layer, the insulating layer or the polymer layer, has a weakness or breaks down or is failed or is damaged, which allows contact between the anode and the cathode. So you end up with a direct short circuit, and the energy in the cell actually effectively dissipates through that circuit. Particles during manufacture can be an issue as well. That was one of the issues with the Samsung Note batteries, that and burrs on some of the internal connections. Collision and impact damage can lead to internal short circuit. Dendrites are another one. Basically, if the cell is charged or more likely discharged below its safe value, it causes a needle-like structure to be formed inside the battery cell, and if this becomes too large, it can actually penetrate the actual insulating layer. Overloading the battery, so too high a current draw, will also lead to overheating. Basically, the internal resistance within the cell causes heat dissipation. I'm sure we've all felt warm batteries at some point, and that's basically just the power dissipated internally in the cell. As I noted, discharge is another issue. Basically, if it's allowed to completely drain during storage or use, it can lead to components inside the battery breaking down, and dendrites. External short circuit and external heat influences are also the other issues. Basically, if a cell is heated, you will end up with it damage internally and it going into a thermal runaway again. So the issue there is when a cell in a pack fails it tends to cause heating to the adjacent cells, and so you effectively end up with a cascade of failure of the cells in that battery or nearby, and in turn battery packs. Next slide, please. Nope, sorry, can you go back one? Can you run that one? So this shows a shopping centre in Northern Ireland. There's a scooter on the left by the door of the McDonald's, sorry, on the right. And as you can see, it's all gone horribly wrong. This video is quite, unfortunately, it's not running in the room, but the video, as you can see, is throwing particles quite some distances from the actual incident location. I can show you in the room later. This one. Next video, please. Or next slide, should I say? This is just a photograph showing a cell that's just simply being crushed in a vice and what happens. And just as you know, that's, as you can see, it's quite a violent reaction, and that's just simply from damage. So you can imagine the issues with that in an actual car. Next slide, please. And can you play the video? This one's guy making up a battery pack. He's obviously using a nice soldering iron, which is something you have to do with them sometimes, but is not ideal. This one is running in this room. Good. This video also shows one of the issues with the cells. As you can see, they've got there fairly quick. They started to get fire extinguishers on it, and it all looks to be under control. However, you then start to get the cascade effect of other cells starting to kick in, and this is one of the issues with lithium-ion cells. They're very difficult to put out once you get an issue with it. Okay, next. This is another example of how quickly things can go. Scooter being charged in a flat, and quite a violent reaction. Can you run that one again, please? So you can just see him literally plug it in and put it on charge, and everything's gone virtually within seconds. So that's, you know, that's real time scenarios. I mean, one of the issues is, if you can consider this occurring on an aircraft. This video is quite nice as well. It shows a scooter, and it shows that it actually, the cells will produce two types of gases, one that's heavier than air, and the other one that's lighter than air. And as you can see, when they can go very violently. So you end up with a well-developed fire very, very quickly, and big issues there. I mean, you can imagine that occurring in a battery pack on an aircraft. It's going to be very difficult, and you can see why the companies are taking so much time and security to make sure we're not carrying them, or carrying them in the right places. This next video shows a electric vehicle. It was a collision with a tow truck at about 100 kilometers an hour. And there is no petrol or diesel involved in that fire. So that's the issue. Another issue we see with the lithium-ion batteries is the difficulty with firefighting. As you can see there, the firefighters were sensibly behind a wall, spraying water on it. It might be worth playing that one again. And fairly well protected, but the catastrophic failure of it was quite difficult. If they'd have been up close and getting close to it, they might have been in a slightly different.
So how soon did that fire occur after the accident?
The
recovery vehicle.
The recovery vehicle, I'm not sure, to be honest, but it wasn't, it was fairly quickly after, I believe. So yeah, it's yeah, I mean, it is an issue, and it's one of those things that manufacturers or car manufacturers have obviously taken very seriously at this stage, and doing a lot of work on. I know Paul Christensen, he's been working for several of the manufacturers, and stability of batteries and preventing such violent failures of them is one of the big areas of research at the moment. This one is being fairly much available. This is a Tesla that was parked, and some damage, or it was put down to damage on the road, having hit the battery pack, and after it was parked, everything went wrong. Okay. The next slide shows one of the issues of lithium batteries, which is this jet-like flame. Basically, when they go, the way the gases vent, and once ignition occurs, you end up with almost like this blow lamp flame coming out of them. So you can imagine a battery in a car going in this value in either a car park or a car carrier where they're parked, within millimeters of each other, when they're transporting them new. You end up with fire propagation from one vehicle to the next very, very quickly, and again, a fire that's extremely difficult to put out. Tesla's latest recommendations on this, after the big BESS fire in Victoria, is actually to let it burn to completion if you can, and just control the fire around, control the fire spread from it. The issue being that once one cell goes, you end up with, if you put it out, you end up with a number of other cells in that pack that may be in the first extent undamaged, but they've sustained heating, and you can get reignitions many hours or even days after the actual fire's thought to be put out. Next slide. So lithium batteries, obviously, as we're coming on to, are becoming more prevalent in other areas. Battery storage systems. The Victorian Big Battery was one such system, which was a grid scale one, but they're becoming more prevalent in houses, and some of them can be even DIY batteries made from second use, or reclaimed batteries from cars and the like. And we're even starting to see hybrid ships at the moment. Next slide shows a fire in a DIY lithium-ion battery storage system that was a dishwasher was used to house the batteries, and as you can see, the extent of damage to the batteries that were in there and the number of batteries that are in there is extensive, and it's fairly difficult to say which one went first. I mean, in many cases, it doesn't really matter. If you've got a battery and it's that one, and you can pinpoint it to the battery pack, then you've probably got enough to say whether it's a battery of a certain make and model, and there may well be a recovery or not. But sometimes it does matter. This next slide, please. This particular video shows a fire. Hopefully nobody in Melbourne recognises it, but it's in a warehouse in the middle of Melbourne. The guys at the end in the corner, sorry, this video hasn't blown up quite as much as I was hoping, have just basically put a battery on charge from basically a mobile camera type unit. So it's just the box there was from a mobile camera that you quite often see out at sites after an incident to provide security or at festivals and the like. It's about to go out on charge. So they put the battery on charge before they take the camera and everything out on site. Next video. And about 30 minutes later, we see the battery kick off. Is it running on this one?
The next slide.
Next slide, sorry. So I'll wait for the room to catch up if it runs.
It's sitting on the top of the play button.
Okay, sometimes just clicking on it does it. You got it. So you've got the developing fire. For those of you online and a bit ahead of everybody else, the guys that you can see there have now seen it. So they've seen it within a minute or so of the battery actually failing. They start to react quite quick. In a minute, you'll see one of them grab a hose and actually start to try and fight the fire. So they think about it. One thing to note about the videos, sometimes they show that the fire being a bit more intense than it actually is, hence the probably not getting quite as close and dangerous as they look to be at that stage. But you can see the guy in the orange now just having pulled out the hose and helped his mate, and so they've got a hose pipe on it, and you would think at this stage they might be able to control the fire at least and keep hold of it, and minimize the damage. Unfortunately, one of the issues here, the items stored on the top of the racks were all plastic. If we want to go on to the next slide. So they're fighting it on the screen here. The next one. That's all right. That was the end result. Sorry. Yes, so that was the end result of that particular fire. As you can see, it's the fire brigade were unable to really tackle it very well and get a hold of it, mainly because once they got there, the fire was fully developed and spreading rapidly. Next slide. That was the state of the scene when I got there, by the time the fire brigade released it to us and allowed us in, by which time they'd done a lot of demolition and everything else and trying to find the actual cell that was of interest. Having not seen the video at that stage was difficult to say the best. But again, I mean, I think the video evidence on that one was pretty compelling, and the battery is actually was that size. Unfortunately, those online can't see it, or probably see it, so it's a fairly sizable battery, and as you can see, it's that caused all that damage. So the state of cells and things when we see them after an incident. This picture shows a couple of them. I've actually got the cells on the left here for the people in the room if they want to look at them. They're in a nice clean bag, so you don't need to get too dirty. I mean, saying which one of those actually went first is very difficult. The cells on the light are a battery from a electric bike. and the cells on the right are from some golf carts. Thank you. This video shows, or the video on the left shows, two cells being CTs, or slices of cells that have been CT scanned to look through them. The two cells were from a laptop, and basically they were both fire damaged, or the one with the picture on the left actually had a bit of a fissuring. In the first instance, when you look at the two in the video, the one on the right seems to have sustained more severe damage, but it's generally a bit more uniform throughout the whole cell. Whereas the one on the right, as you get towards the end of the scan, you sort of see the damage start to increase, and the deformation of all the layers internally of it start to increase. And then sort of the point where it's actually blown itself out through the side of the case. So in that case, the vent cap didn't work, didn't react fast enough, and you ended up with an explosion. Some of the issues that we had with these are basically laptops, for instance. You know, it's quite clear it started in the laptop, but is it a replacement battery or not? One particular case I had was it was laptops that were bought in by a firm for their engineers, and basically they kept them on the shelf ready as spares for engineers when they needed them. The laptops, there were two laptops, refurbished laptops purchased as spares. They were put on the shelf, left there for about 6 months, until one of the new engineers joining needed a laptop. So the engineer started to prepare the laptop and set it up for him. He then left the laptop on charge overnight on his desk, and in the early hours of the morning there was a fire. Patterns of damage all showed that it started at this laptop, but one of the issues on that particular case was whether the battery was genuine or not, whether it was a genuine manufacturer's original part or not. The refurbishment company they bought it from had actually fitted new batteries, and they were aftermarket batteries, so they weren't genuine batteries. When we started to look through it, fortunately we had a second laptop that was still on the shelf with exactly the same battery, and when we started to look at the battery from that one, it soon became apparent that the battery management circuitry was not as good as the original manufacturer's. So it wasn't balancing the cells, so making sure each cell had exactly the same charge properly, and the issue being with it having been left for 6 months on a shelf, the battery had self-discharged to below the state where it should have done, and the manufacturer's battery would have switched itself off and not been usable. Battery management circuit on the aftermarket battery was less than ideal from that point of view, and the end result was the failure and the fire. I think that ended up being about £500,000 worth of damage from a £100 battery. Next slide, please. Battery disposal. I mean, one of the issues that's been asked is how to dispose of these things. B-Cycle are one of the companies in Australia who tend to specialise in this, and there is another company around as well that do it. B-Cycle themselves are putting bins in various supermarkets and the things, so you can just put them in there and do it. One of the recommendations, and I've seen the issue on a container ship fire, where basically one of the issues that you need to do when they're recycling them, they need to tape the terminals to make sure you don't get short circuits before disposing of them, and I'm guilty myself of not doing so. to prevent it. In the container ship fire, even that one, I mean, they had been taped properly, but overall the storage was a bit poor, and when they were moving the container partway through the voyage, so they were in Singapore, and the container started emitting smoke. Fortunately, it was fairly isolated in that case, but yeah. Next slide. As I said, Audi, Battery World, and all the other big places are starting to put bins there that you can put them in. I haven't seen any instructions to tape the ends of the cells before you do it, but that'd probably be prudent. Next slide. So how do they recycle these? Well, I mean, one of the processes I came across on the container ship fire was they were actually going to a company called Umicore. They show their graph of how the cells are made, and then they end up going through the recycling process and the substances being reused. Basically, they put them through a smelter and try to recover all the rare alloys, anything that's not recoverable, and what they call the slag that's left is generally these days going into building materials such as cement and concrete and the like. Next slide. This table shows roughly sort of the amounts of materials that they're getting back from recycling them. The average recycling efficiency is about 70% now. So you know there's still 30% sort of wastage along the line, but it's getting better all the time, I think. And this slide is interesting. This shows the sort of what's coming along in the future, or planned for the future, or the trend of things. Interestingly, the sort of next generation or the next stage is to try and improve the batteries for capacity and energy storage. The grey box there is then they're saying they're going to be trying to improve the safety of them. I still just think that's the wrong way round, but that's the way it's going. And then there'll obviously be other developments with different types of technology, different anode cathodes, and different chemistries, etc. And I think that's
that brings us to the end. We've got plenty of time to go through questions, so we can if we pull up the questions on, if there's been any questions online.
There's quite a number of questions online. I don't know if you want to go to any in the room first.
All right, let's try that.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Recycling battery storage bins. Have you seen any incidents of fires in those?
Yes and no.
Sorry, so the question is if we've had any incidents of fires in the battery disposal bins, like at supermarkets and things like that.
They're just flimsy plastic bins. They often have fire protection.
Yeah.
And they're usually inside building, and they pose a risk to clients.
Yeah, and they mix batteries as well. So, for instance, they'll have dry cells and lithium cells and all sorts in them. I mean, I think I haven't personally seen any involving them at the moment. I haven't checked on our system whether we have. I wouldn't imagine it's possible that we have. But on that point, at the moment, people aren't generally recycling that many lithium-ion batteries. It's predominantly dry cells and single-use cells that are going into those bins. I mean, we do get fires involved in those due to short circuits, but they're obviously generally not as violent and not as much of an issue as the lithium batteries. So it is something that's going to, I suspect, become more of an issue, and I think supermarkets and the like will start putting them outside very soon.
So I think it beats the rubbish trucks that have found people disposing lithium batteries in their normal bins. And
Yeah, we've definitely had recycle centres where lithium batteries, and we've got videos of batteries go in during the processing.
Should we go to an online question now? We've got one here that asks, any information in relation to the soot that gets emitted from lithium batteries due to overheating without it actually catching fire? So this person's asking the contamination to TP property from the soot and the costs and difficulty of cleaning up the soot. Has the soot itself been addressed as a major issue as well?
I've not seen any issues with the actual lithium-ion batteries where they've just simply vented and produced gas. The one issue I did see was where the batteries were packed with nickel-cadmium batteries, and there was issues with the cadmium contamination as a result of the fire. So it wasn't directly a contamination issue with the gas from the lithium-ion battery that probably failed in the first instance. It was actually a sort of an effect of it because of the it was in a bin with or in a container with other types of batteries which were more problematic.
We know the soot is made up of some pretty nasty stuff. So if you did have a contamination of soot, you need to do a pretty thorough clean up. So the claims associated with
Yeah, I mean, it didn't produce soot as in the true sense of soot. It's more like a steam-like things. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think that some of the acids are obviously going to be corrosive and issues for metalworks. I mean, I think one of the issues is when they do vent off, it's not necessarily so much the gas that comes off them that becomes the issue. It's the explosion risk of explosion. So you end up with, if you imagine a reasonable sized battery just venting into this room, and at some point it's going to be within its flammable limits and it's just looking for a spark. It's akin to a gas leak basically. So
and it becomes a fire, I'd say.
Yeah, so I mean, and that's one of the issues with firefighting. If they put them out and then they've got these gassing off, they're effectively creating an explosion risk. So it's a double-edged sword, and you can see there's a number of reasons why Tesla would now recommend just to try and let the affected battery burn to completion, or car burn to completion, and just control everything and stop the spread of fire around it.
It is that spread of fire that would come to a point where we've got soot from whatever's being burnt after the battery's knocked on, and then we have the usual soot that's coming out. Yeah.
I mean, plastics generally in a fire are an issue. I mean, you've got the chlorides that are very. I think the fastest I've seen where you've ended up with chlorides is sort of rust starting to form on steel surfaces within hours. At a particular scene, I mean, it was probably the fastest I've ever seen it corroding so fast.
Okay, we should go to the next one.
Yeah, we've got quite a number of questions here in the queue. This person asks, keen to understand the ratios around loss versus type of battery, such as car, house, electronic item. Is there any link between this and people who are often tampering with batteries, such as scooters?
The people that are actually...
The question is really around the loss versus type of battery.
Yeah. I take it you mean but whether the people that are making them up themselves and doing their own things are more likely to have failures. Well, possibly, yes, but
research on e-bike, e-scooters, and the one that caused the most fire was the DIY that you buy online to convert your bike into an e-bike, and it's sort of
I mean.
And it's that sort of
I mean, manufacturers of e-bikes, for instance, will make will be making them in a controlled environment. They'll be making sure they've got the proper battery protection on them, which is critical. I mean, that's probably the point that I haven't brought across, is that the battery management system is a key safety item, and there are varying degrees of how good they can be. Some are very good, some are not quite so good. And then you get into the DIY market where they're not even fitted. So there's all those sorts of issues. So yeah, the DIY stuff I think is got to be more risky.
There's no real, just checking if that might have been part of the question. There's no correlation between size of battery and the sort of fires that you see. With the videos I saw, it was
the bigger the battery, the more likely it's, the more cells, the more energy storage, the more likely it is to, once it does go, is to go more violently and to burn longer and cause more damage. So yeah, there is a correlation there. I mean, a mobile phone going off is fairly limited and fairly small. Whereas if you've got a battery of this size, then you get in sort of, I think that one's got 96 batteries in it. Or 96 cells in it, then you've got not one but 96 cells that are going to go. Once you get a fire going, and once they start, you get into the cascade effect. You're going to end up with a more sustained fire and a longer fire, and it's almost like putting a blowtorch on a log. The longer you put it there, the more likely you are to actually get it to actually ignite. So yeah, it's all going down.
There's a great question here from someone on the line. Is it possible to tell the difference between a faulty battery versus a damaged battery? So due to overcharge or overheating, etc., for the purposes of recovery?
That is always the number one question. To some extent, it depends on how severe the fire is. I mean, for instance, on the warehouse fire where this one was involved, no, you couldn't tell which one was the battery that went and which cell went first. Other fires, for instance, if you can limit that there are only one or two batteries there, then at least you can limit it to the sort of one of those two batteries. But yeah, the issue is because thermal, the final failure is generally due to thermal runaway. The extent of damage to the cell can be, quite extensive, and it can effectively explode. So there's nothing left; it's destroyed in the fire. And actually differentiating between that one and the others that have failed in exactly the same manner, but due to external heating, is in many cases impossible.
After a collision, can car batteries be inspected for damage and risk of failure? And the real crux of the question is, should a battery be replaced after any type of incident?
I would say yes, knowing what I've seen. Yeah, I mean, I think that they can be inspected and they can be looked at. Obviously, if there's no physical or damage to them and they test electrically, then in theory they're fine. But I mean, I think at the moment there remains a risk if you reuse them that there might be something unseen. I mean, it's that balance down to how severe the damage is. If it's a small ding and there's been no fire, then and only part of the battery is damaged, then maybe replacement of that battery is possible. But it needs to be looked at properly, and somebody needs to make that call. And I'm glad it's not me.
There's another question that sort of leads in from that: is, are fire blankets effective in containment? But really, what should consumers be doing if one of these fires looks like it's starting to happen? Doesn't seem to have a lot of time. What steps are they taking other than big ones?
Fires, I mean, I know there's been a number of tests done with ship firefighting systems such as foam and blankets and everything else. I think blankets can be effective on small fires. I mean, and smaller batteries. But I wouldn't guarantee it. But it's got to be better than nothing.
Someone actually, a related question, what is the appropriate fire extinguisher for lithium-ion batteries?
Copious amounts of water is basically the main one. The reason being to actually control them and stop sort of propagation through to the adjacent cells. The only way to stop that is to cool the whole battery pack. And I mean, that is one of the issues with that fire brigades are getting with cars, is once they've got a fire involving an EV, the battery, because of all the collision protection and everything else, it's very hard to get to and actually get water into it. And I mean, I think they've done numerous tests where they started, theoretically putting skips full of water and just dunking the car into the skip. But yeah, exactly that. That's one thing. And I mean, how realistically can you get a container at a scene, a car that's on fire burning, lifted into it? I mean, it's just, there's so many issues. I mean, there's some novel thoughts, but
and at home, if you've got an appliance that's plugged in whilst on charge, you don't want to be throwing water on that.
Yeah, I mean, I would. I mean, unless it's sort of, fairly salty and everything else. I mean, I think there is a minimal risk of electric shock from general water, but ideally, you saw in one of those videos there that they used CO2, and that wasn't very effective. You saw in the warehouse fires that they even got a hose pipe on it and tried to put it out, but it had just spread too quick. Essentially, once the way I look at it, once you get over a fire that's sort of a size of a bin, first aid firefighting is generally fairly limited, going to be more luck than actual
prevention, isn't it? And those sorts of fires, you
Yeah.
want to make sure your charging stations are well away from fire loads. And
Yeah. I mean, it was a hard lesson for that factory. I mean, no charging them in a shed outside, and storing them in a shed outside. But it's not always practical to do that.
because they're also saying those big battery storage facilities you had a picture on. They're also saying now that you shouldn't be buying one of those. You should be attacking it, just let it burn.
Yeah, exactly that. That's exactly the recommendations from Tesla after the Victorian big battery fire, when it was, there were a number of reasons for why that went up. But
So for those online, that was the battery storage or big battery centers being recommended of just let them burn, and not trying to put out fire.
And their cars, they recommended the talks I've seen with them.
It's all very well, and they're in Luton airports.
Well, that's it. I mean, or even worse, in a car carrier that's in the middle of the Pacific or Atlantic, taking brand new cars from A to B, and when they pack them, they literally park up one, get out of that one, park the next one up next to it. So there's no real room to walk around it. So firefighting on ships is becoming a big issue, and I mean, it's always been an issue with car carriers, but with EVs, it's becoming worse.
Sarah, have you got more questions?
Yeah, there's actually quite a lot of more questions. We are at time, but if you're happy answering a few more, we'll plow on,
Yep.
Accepting that some people on the line may have to drop off. This is a good question. Can a battery just suddenly ignite without having power going into it? And is the smoke always white to begin with?
Generally, the smoke's white. And yes, I would have loved to put the video in the presentation, but or the CCTV images in the presentation, but it's a live case, unfortunately. But I have got a case where a battery, it was a defective battery, that was brought back from an electric bike, and it wasn't on charge at the time, and it went violently. So.
There's another question here.
It's more prevalent when they're on charge. It's more likely when they're on charge because the energy state's higher, but it can still happen, albeit less. It's less common, I would say.
What do you recommend in regards to charging phones and home devices in relation to safety?
What do I recommend, or what do I do?
Both.
I would recommend not charging them next to the bed, or anywhere that's vulnerable to the fire, and maybe putting them in some sort of ceramic bowl or something. But I mean, the reality is, I still charge them next to the bed. Yeah.
Ideally not.
Are there any toxic gases? Are there any toxic gases or residues left at a scene after a fire that we need to be concerned of for clients or claims assessors?
Generally not, because it's burned away. I mean, there are toxic substances and everything else left after the fire anyway. So whether it involves lithium, I don't think a lithium battery makes it any particularly worse, but once you get plastics and other items involved and furnishings involved, modern furnishings especially, there are going to be toxic gases left and toxic substances left around that you need to be wary of. I mean, most of it only just needs general PPE and proper disposal, but it is an issue. But I don't think lithium batteries make it any particularly worse. It's the items around them. One thing I didn't sort of say in the talk was that lithium battery fires are actually becoming quite a common go-to for fire services and the like, when they they end up at a scene and that's the cause. One thing that I have seen a couple of times, and I'd be interested in Jon's car actually, is the connections to the battery. So for instance, on EV vehicles, they can be actually poorly connected, not connected in the right configuration. And I've seen at least one incident where of a near miss with a connection failure, so it's very easy to blame the lithium-ion battery, but it may well be down to its installation, and that sort of comes back to the DIY installations too. So
there's a comment here that most lithium battery fire claims that this person is saying involve power banks. Are these more susceptible to fires? And it links into something someone else has asked about. Is there any data or stats to suggest that one type of battery and one type of device is more susceptible than other types?
That's interesting. I mean, I've not actually seen any power bank fires myself. They're all generally EVs or scooters, or battery packs that are on charge for different items. So yeah, no, I've not seen many. I mean, I think anything with a lithium battery in, depending on it, where it comes from, could be an issue. And I wouldn't particularly put any one thing in a particular category, other than the fact that DIY scooters and the like, where they are trying to get as much energy out of them as they can for speed and the like, then I think that's probably the higher, the more vulnerable. But other than that, I think it's just generally in everything.
I'm going to combine two questions here, because someone was asking if these batteries are so dangerous, why are they being so heavily pushed and used in society today? And then there's a comment here that this person sees a lot of hysterical commentary on Facebook forums, etc., saying don't use these things, they all catch fire, they're dangerous. The crux of the question is around, is it just getting lots of attention because it's new technology, so like anything, there's a spotlight on it, or is it that it's really prevalent?
I mean, it is becoming more prevalent, but they're becoming more common. I mean, I would imagine there's an awful lot more car crashes out there every day than there are battery fires. So, it's just down to the fact that these days they provide so many advantages for ease of life, such as, having a phone that lasts all day, or a vehicle that you can, put in your boot and scoot to work on, that the advantages outweigh the risks at the moment, I think is probably why we're using them. Yeah, and I mean, ultimately, it is still only a small percentage of them that are actually catching fire. It's just the fact that they're becoming, they're now everywhere.
We've got another question. With electric cars becoming more popular around the world, what's the best way to ensure they're safe during car crashes?
That is a fairly hot topic, I think, for fire brigades and the like. There are a number of the manufacturers actually put out recommendations about what they should do and what should be done in the event of a crash. Disconnecting the battery. There's usually a main disconnection plug in the vehicle somewhere. Whether it can be got to or whether it can be accessed after a severe accident is a good question. But yeah, the main one is to isolate the battery if you can, and hopefully, set it aside so that if there is an issue, then it's not going to cause too much of a problem for things around it. But yeah, I mean, that is one of those things that manufacturers are working on very, very, very hard at the moment, is what to do with damaged vehicles.
Someone's asking here, is sand more effective on a fire? I guess that's a comment to more effective than water.
A lot of it.
Possibly if you can get enough on it, but basically water tends to be more effective because it's to hand. So if you've got lots of sand, I mean, for instance, to transport damaged or used lithium cells, or any cells, in fact, one of the methods is to actually put them into a container with sand or vermiculite around them to actually sort of try and isolate them and make it a solid mass, so that if you do get a fire, it's sort of contained. But so yes, it can help, but I think water just tends to be the much easier and more available medium to fight the fire, if you can.
A great question here. Are there any Australian regulations that batteries need to meet, or is it an unregulated industry?
There is a standard, and I've forgotten to actually put it in, I think. Let me check. I did note it down in one of my notes, I think.
The short answer is yes, I suppose.
Yes, and I think we're ahead of the UK on this one. So yeah, there is an Australian standard that relates definitely to battery storage systems for houses and the like, and buildings. I would imagine it's still in the process of some development and will be refined over the next several years. But yeah, there is one out there.
Have you heard of any advancements in technology that closes down the charge if ruptured, i.e. solar batteries?
I believe there are technologies out there that they're working on, but I've not looked into it in any great detail. So
we've got a comment/question here. Not all rechargeable batteries are lithium-ion. Is that right? Historical forklift recharging has not incurred such issues.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, basically the lead acid batteries that are in normal, on historical forklift trucks are pretty stable, and if they do fail, they very rarely fail in an incentive manner, and if they do, it's generally down to the installation and the electrical connections to them. So yeah, I mean, that technology is safer. The difference is that, I mean, in a forklift truck, you're not worried about weight, but whereas, an EV with lithium batteries, the power to weight ratio of the battery is so much better with the lithium that, it's an ongoer. I mean, you need that amount of energy storage to make the car viable.
Are any insurers or even Crawford formulating any recommendations for commercial property owners in order to mitigate all these risks?
Yeah, someone in the room nodding. So yes.
Charging spaces in car parks, underground car parks, so about fire protection and stuff.
So in the room, we've had a nod that Zurich is working on this and providing advice around protection, prevention.
I know of one policy where there was a increased excess for battery if the fire involved batteries on charge. So yeah, insurers are starting to consider this as an issue.
I'm not aware of anything Crawford's putting out other than doing this sort of thing to raise awareness.
We've still got lots of questions in the queue, but perhaps you could look to the room to see if there's any more in the room, so those people who are there are not missing out.
No, none here.
Okay, we are
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Gosh, it's hard to pick. You guys are really interested in this topic, which means we might need to do another webinar on this same topic potentially. Let's go to, well, this is a good one to end on. Any key recommendations, like sort of top 3 recommendations for how insurers can support customers to avoid fires?
I think it would be around that.
Okay, top 3
raising
pieces
awareness.
of advice, maybe.
If you've got a insured that's using a lot of lithium batteries and charging them and everything else, then I think you need to I would be sort of suggesting having somewhere outside of the building or in a safe area of the building to basically ensure that the fire, if it does occur, is more containable and doesn't affect the entire building. Yeah, and I mean that, for instance, that warehouse, that they themselves sort of went down the route of making sure that for the future they're going to be charging them outside in their other premises, and just buying a little shed because they do charge a lot of batteries. So there's those sort of things that are prudent. It's almost in the dangerous goods sort of handling sort of principles, if not in the same, quite in the same, to the same level, but it's some of those types of considerations really that may be worth.
Maybe one of your advice be that not to, if you've got any batteries that have visible physical damage, not to keep using.
Yeah, I was going to bring one in actually, but yeah, so if they've swollen, if they're not, they don't look particularly healthy, or if you've got physical damage on them, set them aside somewhere safe, ideally not in the house or garage, and dispose of them as best you can. Yeah, because
Okay.
I'll hand back to you, John, to wrap up.
Yeah, I'll wrap that up there, and thank you very much, Mark, for coming and sharing your knowledge and videos. I'm sure it's a bit of an eye-opener for some people of how these things can go so badly wrong so quickly. And I think, well, we've got our details up on the screen for those watching online. And I think we can look through the questions later and see if there's any absolute doozies we can respond to directly, Sarah.
I'm not sure that we can tell who all of them are from. Many of them will come in anonymously. But if they're burning questions, the details for both of you are up on the screen and people can feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you very much for everyone for attending. And yeah, please reach out if there are any more queries or if we can be of use to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much.